Welcome to episode 239 of Control the Controllables. We've got another exciting podcast episode for you here today, as we're going to try and break down and give you some insight into the Asian swing. For some, that's been going for 6-7 weeks, whether that's out in China, Hong Kong, Japan. Some people would have even started off in Thailand. The WTA Tour will stay out in Asia, albeit a long way away, as they go to Saudi Arabia for the WTA finals. And what I thought was, and fear not, I know there's a lot of big fans of Freddie Nielsen and Kieran Forster. They'll be back on other panels, don't you worry. But I wanted this to be people that have just been out there. You know, we've heard a lot specifically about China over the years. You know, Wuhan hasn't had a 1,000 event there for 5 years. There's many stories that are attached to China, whether it's linked to COVID, whether it's linked to Peng Shui, whether it's linked to the WTA pulling out of certain events. You know, there's lots that's gone on and then they're back like nothing else has happened. And I think when we're the other side of the world, we don't always quite pick up exactly what's happening. So I wanted the panel to be full of people that had spent some time out there over the last few weeks. And I'm delighted to have Eleanor Preston, who has been on the podcast before. Well, Eleanor runs the Amelia Group, you know, very much a sports content and communications, media, operations. You know, they do a great job. They work very closely with the WTA, and Eleanor was out there working at the Wuhan Open. And then Calvin Betton, who was out there with his player Henry Patton, and also Harri Heliovarra, and a big well done to them for their 250 ATP title in Stockholm. And he was there in a working capacity on the coaching team and on a coaching side. And then we got Candy Reid, who works for ATP Media. You will hear her voice far and wide. She used to work for CNN, does a fantastic job. And again, she was out in Beijing. So to be able to, and then she's been commentating on the last few events as well. So to be able to bring these minds together, these insights together, is incredible. And I'm not sure what the conversation's what's gonna happen in this conversation. There could be some fireworks. You know, we're gonna have some big topics to discuss. And when Calvin Betton's around, you've always got to look out anyway. Yeah, looking forward to the chat, and I'm sure you guys will love listening to this one as always. I'll pass you over to our Asian Swing 2024 panelists. So a big welcome to our Asian Swing panelists, and we got Eleanor Preston and Calvin Betton. How you doing, guys?
Good, thank you.
All good.
And you qualified. You qualified by getting on that aeroplane to Asia. That was the first way that you got onto this podcast, because obviously a lot has been said over the years. Obviously, certainly China in particular, you know, and I think the second bit, not a lot probably was said. I was getting a lot of messages from friends or people in the tennis world that felt like maybe what was going on over in Asia was quite a long way from Europe. You know, maybe it wasn't being passed through as much as obviously with time zones that we might get what we're used to back over here in Europe. And before I went, I probably had some preconceived ideas. I've not been to China for 30 years. It almost felt a bit like, oh, am I going to a different planet in some ways? I know, Eleanor, you've spent a lot of time there over the years, and I'll start with you. I guess I saw you in Wuhan. You know, we spent a few days there, which was fantastic. How was your own personal experience of the events, and maybe comparatively of where it was the last time you were there?
Well, I mean, obviously Wuhan in particular, a lot's happened, but with any Chinese city, you know, 30 years is obviously a long time, but 5 years is a long time, because these cities are growing very quickly. You know, and Wuhan's a really good example where the tournament was, and I'd last done it in 2018, so I hadn't been there for 6 years. But when the tournament first started 10 years ago, where the tournament was there wasn't anything. It was the middle of nowhere. It was a stadium in the middle of nowhere. Now you go, and the Optics Valley area, which is what the stadium's named after, is now this whole section of Wuhan. It's got a subway. It's got as in a rail system, not just a sandwich shop, but it's also got one of those. It's got a shopping centre opposite the stadium. It's got houses. It's a whole mini city within a city that's built up probably in the last 7 or 8 years. So not having been back to Wuhan for 6 years, I saw an enormous change, in all sorts of ways, but really for me, a very positive experience to go back there because, I've got a lot of friends there. We've worked at the tournament a long time. It's a really good blended team, if you like, between the local team and some kind of experienced internationals who come in to help. And we've all worked together a lot. And so it was really nice to be back there. And it was a great tournament. It was a really successful tournament. We had great crowds. So it was actually very, very positive and lovely to be back there.
And in terms of, you say, the great crowds, if you could have handpicked the semi-finals at that tournament, because I guess when we go into, there's been talk this year about regionalised tours, and you need to have your local heroes as well as your global stars. And for you, if you didn't follow Wuhan 1000, we had, and you will say it better than me, but Qin Wen, who the gold medalist from China, who is also from Wuhan, who went through and obviously made the final. She played against Wang in the semi-final, so you had the two Chinese playing each other in the semis, and then you had the global stars of Aryna Sabalenka and Coco Gauff playing in the other semi-final. And it felt like, the Rolling Stones were coming into town, the amount of people that were flocking to the courts. And I guess if we'd ended up with a tournament like Kazakhina playing against Andreeva, as we saw the week after, we probably wouldn't have got those crowds.
Yeah, although in saying that, we had for Sabalenka against Coco Gauff, which obviously was the non-Chinese of the semi-finals, if you like, because the two Chinese women played each other, which, guaranteed a Chinese finalist, which obviously was great in terms of selling out the final very quickly. That was absolutely packed. But yeah, you're right. I would say generally tickets were up across the week, and I think I've talked about some of the changes that have happened in the city. Tennis has bedded into China and Chinese culture a lot in the last 10 years. There's now a habit of going to watch major sports events, tennis included. They've watched a lot more tennis on TV because of players like Zhang Qinwen in particular. I think the gold medal that she won in Paris has really cut through, because it's something that you don't have to be a tennis fan to know who she is. She's now a celebrity out with tennis. Because, when the tours first went out to China and started these top level events, there wasn't a core tennis audience necessarily that was there. You had Li Na, who was also from Wuhan. You had that kind of interest in tennis, but it was quite, it was growing. And it's been nurtured over the last 10 or 15 years. So now it's much more part of the kind of sporting culture there.
I don't know if you have only electric cars in Barnsley, Calvin Betton. Maybe not yet. Maybe that is coming. But Beijing, Shanghai, they're a long way from Barnsley. Huh? So how was your first experience in China, and how do you reflect on that period?
It was actually my second experience in China. I went to China, although kind of still my first, because I went to China in 2007 with a player I worked with. But we got to the tournament, which I think was in Guangzhou, for a futures tournament. We were meant to be going out there for 2 weeks, and he snapped a wrist ligament in the warm-up, the first practice warm-up. So we were on a plane back 24 hours later. So I have been to China once before for about 2 days total. And that was it. So yeah, this was my first time there for an extended period of time. And I think the thing what stood out for me, I got some sort of various thoughts on it. The thing what stood out for me is the first place I've been for a while that has a completely different culture and setting, I guess. I think that a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I do think that Europe, I do think that Europe over the last 10 years, a lot of the places have started looking the same. They've started, you get the sort of, and don't get me wrong, they're all lovely. Some of the, I'm here in Vienna at the minute, the architecture is beautiful and that kind of thing. But I've been to Bucharest this year as well, and I've been to Murcia, and I've been to Stockholm, and I've been to Antwerp, and they all kind of are the same. They have the same shops, they have the same sort of look, and if you dropped me in any one, I don't know if I could tell you which was which. Whereas both cities I went to in China, Beijing and Shanghai, were completely different, and completely different from each other. I thought they were completely different worlds, worlds apart from each other, those two places.
And at this stage, Candy Reid, I have to give you a big welcome and an apology. You know, the host hasn't done his job well enough. So for you to jump in and join us, a big welcome. And all you've missed is just us sharing our experiences of China so far. So thanks for joining. And how was your Chinese experience this year?
My Chinese experience, and thanks for having me, Dan. I was just about to bite into a homemade apple crumble when I got the call. But my Chinese experience was, well, I didn't quite know what to expect, I think, because I'd never been to China. Getting a visa was a bit of a hassle. I actually got my Chinese visa in the New York embassy because I was commentating at the US Open. And I got an Uber with Luciano Darderi, the Italian player. So we've become firm friends since. So, you know, where better to make friendships than in the Chinese embassy in New York. So that was a bit of a hassle because I realized as soon as you put reporter on your visa application, things got a little bit more difficult. So it wasn't the normal 4 days. But a young man called Juan, I think, helped me a lot. So he sort of fast forwarded it. He understood the situation. So the visa was complete. And China, I think, was really nice. I really liked it. I thought it was very like America. And I was in Beijing, not Shanghai. The hotel was probably the best hotel I've ever stayed in. The transport they put on for all of us was fantastic. The food, we got to eat with the players and players dining, and they treated us beautifully. They had a Michelin star chef there a few days. They couldn't be more helpful, the Chinese people. There are a few sort of bells and whistles and regulation things that we had to go through. For instance, the cameraman and I go on court and do the post-match interview with the winner. And at first we were going to wear this kind of red jacket to show that we were meant to be there. And we eventually convinced them that hopefully we didn't need to, and they were fine with that. So there are a few rules in place, but overall, a really positive experience.
The WTA stopped going to China a few years ago for some pretty serious accusations. You know, nobody, or certainly not many people seem to be in the know. But are we also here at risk of having short memories as well? Because that happened. Obviously, Peng Shuai was very much at the centre of that. I saw on Andy Roddick's podcast the other day they were discussing this as well, and it's like, does anybody know how she is? Is that coming out? Do we not still have a duty to be bringing that into the forefront still, Candy?
I think that's sort of null and void. I don't know really what's happened to Peng Shuai. It's sort of been, I'm not sure, swept under the carpet, or there's not enough information, or we believe everything is fine and she's in China and seems to be safe and well. But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has more information than I do. And then, of course, COVID hasn't helped, has it? Because, of course, the WTA season finale was supposed to be in China. So a lot's been thrown up into the air, and now Riyadh is going to host for the first time the season finale. And the top 7+, Barbora Krejcikova are all going. So, yeah, it's a bit puzzling, that one. But I think it looks like the money and the interest are back in China now for tennis. So the appetite is back again, which is really good, I think, for everyone involved. Because, of course, the Middle Eastern money is great. But the Chinese money also helps, especially the WTA. Maybe Eleanor could speak more than I can about this. But, yeah, the Peng Shuai is a bit of a weird one for me.
Because I had one conversation about it when I was there, and I was told, be careful talking about it because your phones will pick it up. which actually it almost it was just a little kind of reminder. You know, we were actually sat in Starbucks at the time, and I think Candy, was you that said you feel like you're in the US. It did. It felt very Western in lots of ways, but you have these certain moments. But when that unnerved me a little bit. It was just, you know, when I was kind of reminded on that. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Calv.
I think there's still some serious questions to be asked there. I'm not really comfortable with sweeping it under the carpet and just assuming that it's all well and good. I think that we would still require some answers, but I think that China know what they can do on that kind of thing. They know how to deal with it. I think it's something that they do regularly, the government over there, and I think they figured we just won't budge on it, and eventually they'll have to come back here because there's too much money here. And I think it's disappointing from that tennis approaches it in that way. I think WTA in particular, I think, kind of bluffed it a bit because they made out that they boycotted China for some time. They didn't actually boycott any tournaments in China. Those tournaments weren't going to happen because of COVID. So in terms of the actual number of tournaments that they missed, because one of their players, a WTA player, had disappeared over some things that had nothing to do with tennis, I think it just never happened. And the ATP has sort of gone back, but I think, you know, we're seeing even worse than that. What's going to happen in Saudi Arabia in a couple of weeks? I think, you know, there's even bigger questions to be answered about that, but no one seems that bothered about that either, because everybody's just thinking, well, I don't care about that as long as there's plenty of money there.
I know we're on a heavy subject now, and we'll move to tennis in a minute. But I do think these are subjects that we should at least bring into the sphere. You know, everyone's. You know, I received a call today from BBC 5 Live. They were trying to get a little bit of information from me on certain things that I honestly didn't know, you know, or they were asking me questions like, you know, are the players being told that they can't speak? You know, are the players being, I guess, gagged as such? And, you know, I think there's interest, and there's a lot of interest being generated. We had the Six Kings last week. You know, the biggest purse. This is not just a WTA thing. You know, you've got Carlos Alcaraz, Yannick Sinner, arguably the two biggest superstars in world sport right now, but certainly in tennis, you know, complaining about playing too many matches and being tired and all of these things. It's a long season, but the 6 million winning purse seemed to get them over the line and on that flight to Riyadh, you know. So I think there's a lot that does go into this. But just to share a story, and I know, Calv, you feel quite strongly on this because you like to jump on me for being a Newcastle United supporter. Now,
I mean, who can blame him, to be honest?
I had this conversation. My cousin is a Sunderland fan, and I think we all create narratives to suit us, right, in different times as well. And he was telling us one day in the pub that it was embarrassing that we still supported Newcastle United. If the Saudis had come in and bought Sunderland, he would stop supporting them. Okay, that was the narrative. And sports fans aren't the best with these things. And then his son turned around and said, "Dad, do you watch Star Wars?" And he said, "Yeah, it's my favourite." He knew that Star Wars was his favourite. So he said, "Do you watch Star Wars?" He went, "Yeah, of course I do. It's amazing." He goes, "Well, are you going to stop watching Star Wars? Because the Saudis have just bought a massive stake in Disney. And Disney have now bought Star Wars. You know, so are you now going to stop watching Star Wars, Dad?" You know, and I thought it was quite a clever way to kind of get the conversation on the other side, right? Because it almost feels it's going to get to some point where if we all stand on this moral high horse, and I think we all have a duty for the message, and we all have a duty to try and, you know, have an impact. And I really hope the WTA will, with the WTA finals over a 3-year period, you know, getting these bright, amazing women going to Saudi and putting on this incredible show, and, you know, giving back to the community and the public, and, you know, all of these things. But if we all did just kind of put our flag in the sand, maybe we wouldn't watch any sport. Maybe we wouldn't do anything, Calv.
I mean, I think on that one, Kiernan, that one came out. That one's always come out, and I don't think there's any sensibility in that stuff about Star Wars. People used to say as well, like, and I know that Liam Brody once said to me, like, "Oh, well, you know, you'll go to the Shard, and that's owned by the Saudis." But I don't feel an emotional connection with a building in central London. I don't feel an emotional connection with Star Wars. I feel that you feel an emotional connection with Newcastle. I feel an emotional connection with Man United, and we were nearly bought by Qatar. I do not blame you for. I don't think you should stop supporting Newcastle by any stretch of the imagination. I feel for the fans of those clubs because it's put them in a predicament that they shouldn't be put in. What I have an issue with is when fans of those clubs start defending the regimes that own them when it's outside of football, because then it has worked. This is a sports washing situation, and you're now getting fans, particularly of Manchester City. And I've actually had some tennis fans onto me on Twitter in the last few days, spouting things like, they're modernising in Saudi Arabia, they're trying to get more westernised, and it's utter nonsense. They're not more westernised at all. I know people who go there. One of my best friends was there last week. I know for a fact that there was in 2024 alone, there's been 214 public beheadings in Saudi Arabia. That's the most there's ever been in any country. That's the most there's ever been in Saudi Arabia. So the idea that they're getting better on these things, it's pie in the sky stuff. Going back to tennis specifically, I've kind of had to let the idea drop that we won't do it. I kind of have to accept that it is inevitable. What I do not like is the players and the people and the fans defending it. And I think the notion as well that the one that really winds me up is, and I know that you were quoting other people, Kiernan, I knew not you that was saying it, this idea that, maybe we can enforce change from within. That's the biggest load of nonsense, because the only reason that they're going to pay them to go there is that they do not try and enforce any change from within. That country has no intention of changing. They think that we should live like them, not the other way around. So that I can't buy in anything into that. I don't understand why the players, and I was particularly disappointed, and this might upset some people, I was particularly disappointed in Beijing when I was talking to a few of the female players who I know have taken stances on women's rights, LGBT rights, that kind of thing, to then go basically, I don't care, they're paying us a fortune. And those people went down in my estimation somewhat. I thought, right, you have these principles then until the point where your principles are bought. And I do not like that. What? I don't understand why these people can go. They can go and play, and they can go. You can say, look, I'm going. It's a tournament. I'm a tennis player. I'm a professional tennis player. The tournament's here. I'm going. I will collect the money because I'm a professional tennis player. I do not like us being here. I wish there was somewhere better to be. That you're not breaking any rules or anything there by saying that. And I think they would come out
quick question. A quick question for you. Yeah. What do you think with the women in particular going there for the WTA finals? Do you not think that it will help Saudi Arabian women to see women as top athletes, in skirts, in tank tops and the like, and young Saudi Arabian girls seeing these amazing women in action?
Also,
sure, it might do that. They won't be allowed to copy that though. Do we know if they're going to let females go and watch yet? Because they don't drive. And they don't go to school.
I was in Jeddah last year for the Next Gen, and there were women there. And I can also tell you that the head of the Saudi Arabian Tennis Federation is a woman, because she's become quite a good friend of mine. She has one son that plays on the Davis Cup team, and she is very much for women's rights and the progression of women, and she's been very much behind getting tennis over there. So I know for a fact that her thought process is the correct one, and she is trying to do all the right things. I also know that a lot of people are asking her for money.
I'm sure, Candy. Yeah. Listen, I'm sure. And again, it's not the Saudi Arabian women that I'm having a go at here. The opposite. I'd love it. I'd love us to get there, but the feeling I'm getting is that there has been no movement at all on it. And I'll tell you a quick story about this, because my best friend, I can't really say who it is. He represents an athlete, a sportsman who has received quite a lot of money from Saudi Arabia. And he said he was over there last week, and they got talking with somebody at the event about how the Saudi Arabian men can marry multiple women at one stage. Yeah, four women, yeah. And he said, no, it makes sense, because you can start a relationship and you can get the women pregnant and they can have a child, and it's all in wedlock. And then if you decide you don't want to be with that woman anymore, you can just divorce them. And my friend went, yeah, and then you just have to support the mother and the child. And he said, no, you have to support the child as long as it's a boy. And that blew me away. So if it's a female, you don't have to support the wife or the girl. I'll move away from the moralistic standpoint. Anybody who follows me on any sort of social media knows.
Would you go? Would you go, Cal? Would you go?
I'd have to approach it purely as a work thing, you know. I think, again, my position is, it's not, I'm against it. I'm also against how China operates in a lot of ways. It's like saying, if Donald Trump wins, will I be in New York next year? I don't agree with any of that, but I think that the thing what bothers me the most now is the defending of it. And I think that's what worries me the most about it, because I think this whole thing with sport, I do really think it's a sports washing operation. And you only have to look. I don't want to go back to football again. This is a tennis podcast, but you only have to look how, and I don't even think your club are the worst, Kino. You only have to look at how Manchester City fans are approaching the allegations that are levelled at them at the minute. They've managed to turn it into, they're basically now full on defending the Abu Dhabi state. And they've basically weaponized football fans. And that's what worries me. And I worry that they're now weaponizing tennis players to say things like, you know, that it's getting better. It's getting better there. Blah, blah, blah. I'll just move away from the... So to answer your question, Kino, I'd have to, if I got asked to go, I'd have to have a think. I'm not saying I would or I wouldn't. Anyway, what my friend also told me, and I think this might be a concern, is he said the place is chaos. The infrastructure is not ready for any sort of event. The traffic, apparently, he said the traffic's the worst he's ever been in any part of the world. The buildings are half made. He said that the arenas are fine where they're holding the tennis, but he said the organisation is horrendous. And he said what blows his mind, and this is a very successful person with a very successful athlete who he represents. He said what blows his mind is that the Saudis are spending this level of money, this amount of money, and they're not actually getting anybody in. He said, I don't understand why they just don't go and pay the best in the world to come and run it, or to pay people who know what they're doing to come and run it. Because the organisation is chaos, he said. Getting to the events is chaos. He said, like, the buildings around there, he said, you're driving to the arena, and it's half-built buildings everywhere that don't look like they're getting finished.
Sounds like the south of Spain.
I mean, it could be. But I think, you know, I do wonder if that will come to pass. And, you know, and again, on closing on it, again, another thing that really annoys me with it is when, I think it was Arina Sabalenka said a couple of months ago when asked about Saudi, she said, well, they always look after us, so I've got no problem with it. I thought, come on. Is this where we're at?
Are they allowed? What would happen, Eleanor, if Arina Sabalenka spoke like Calvin about it?
In terms of what are you talking about from a WTA
that was
perspective? I mean, there are rules around not bringing tournaments and events into disrepute, which is standard across. It's not something they've imposed for this. It's something there are standard WTA rules. So I think it would depend on the circumstance. I think players actually, wherever they're playing, understand that they kind of part of the deal of playing any tournament anywhere is that you go and you don't you aren't outspoken about the place you're going to, and that you are and that you say nice things about the place you're going to, whether it's Eastbourne or Wuhan or anywhere, because that is part of you know, people want to hear positive things going into a tennis tournament. But yeah, I mean, the answer is I don't know, because it's the first time we've had WTA finals in Riyadh. But I do know, just picking up on something Calvin said about the organisation. And again, I'm not involved in the finals. I don't know, but I know very, very experienced colleagues who've worked on multiple major events who are travelling out there to work on that tournament. So I think, you know, all events are kind of on that scale are an amalgam of kind of experienced people from all around the world and local teams. So that will be happening. And I also know that whether it's, you know, and I've done lots of Olympic Games, and before every Olympic Games, there are those kind of stories about how the infrastructure is not there. It's going to be a disaster. The whole traffic's going to be a nightmare. This is going to be terrible. So I would also just say that just to be kind of to balance by just making that point.
I think I take what Eleanor said there about there's rules about not bringing the tournament into disrepute and that kind of thing. I think it's two things. I think it's a little bit different here because you're not bringing the tournament, you're bringing the actual country into question.
It's the same
I think
thing.
Also,
if somebody.
Well, I think also though, Eleanor, that if we all work by those rules, then nothing ever happens anywhere. If the players just say, yeah, we'll just praise anywhere we go, then why would Saudi want to change? Why would they want to change their ways? Because the players are going to say it's great. So we can't on one side say we're hoping to enforce change from within, and then say, well, we're definitely not going to say anything negative about it ever, because that's not what we do.
I think it's asking a lot of tennis players to go into any country and they travel to.
Why are tennis players any different?
And take a responsibility for changing an entire way a government is run or a culture is run. And that's
why would tennis players be any different to any member of the public? I don't expect every tennis player to go there and say, I don't like the way this is going. But to say none of them will do it and say, I think it's a lot to expect tennis players. Well, they're only the same as us.
They're not,
I'd like to think that if I was,
because their words have a different consequence, and they're received differently.
Like what? But what is the consequence?
Because they have a bigger platform, they have a bigger profile. I don't think.
But that's what I mean, though, Eleanor. That's what I mean, though. They're putting their profile and they're putting their self-interest above everything else, above the bigger picture. And to say you can't expect them to do that, yes, I can. I can expect some people to be held to higher accord than just saying every tennis player, yeah, well, they might lose some Instagram followers, they might lose some money. These players are already wealthy beyond all comprehension. If Novak Djokovic goes in there and says, I'm not happy about this, but I'm coming here anyway, doesn't make any difference to his profile, any difference to his bank account or whatever. I'd like to think that one or two of them, a couple of them, would be able to speak out on it.
I just don't think, Carl, that also tennis players think in such a long-term view.
I don't think they do, Kiernan. I'm not saying that.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. In terms of like a tennis player, a tennis player loses 2 matches in a row, they start thinking about quitting, about getting rid of their coach. A doubles player loses a couple of matches in a row, starts thinking about getting rid of their partner. They're living in quite a small bubble, so it's then very easy to just take the easy road, right?
I also think
you've got to be very brave. I think you've got to be very brave to be stepping up and using that platform for. And I have to be honest here as well. If I take myself, and maybe this is a fault of mine, I don't know enough about it. I know it's not good. But I know it's not good, and I'm not exactly proud to sit here and say I'm not fully informed on what's happening in China, what's happening in Qatar, what's happening in Saudi, what's happening in every single place, and I want human rights to be taken care of. I want everyone's entitled to have a good life and be looked after, and all of these things. But I'm not informed enough on the subject to be confident enough to probably speak out about it either, and that's maybe where the issue lies slightly as well.
I'd just like one or two of them, or one of them, like somebody to lift himself above a parapet or lift herself above the parapet and say, I'm here because I'm a professional tennis player. I don't like it.
I suspect two of them will, and I think it will be the Americans in the singles. I think if anyone's going to say anything, it'll be Pegula and Goff. Those are the two I suspect.
I hope so. And, I think, those two are the two girls who I've got a lot of time for and a lot of respect. But, I mean, I saw a little clip the other day of Casper Ruud. And again, I keep saying these are the things that really annoy me about this because there's a few of them. But Casper Ruud said, and I do like Casper Ruud, I think he speaks eloquently a lot of the time, and I think he's a good lad. But he said, we hear about, some of the bad stuff. But, what I will say is they're trying to move forward. And I'm thinking, some of the bad stuff. There's some of the bad stuff. 214 beheadings. Public beheadings. Women not allowed to go to school. Women not allowed to read. Women not allowed to have any rights whatsoever most of the time. Slave trade, slave labour, mutilation, killing a foreign journalist and chopping his body up. And we're saying, there's some bad stuff. We can't say that stuff hasn't been swept under the carpet, because it's not getting mentioned at all.
Cal, you've certainly brought it to light. So I think it's people that are listening. It's gonna it's certainly giving a balanced view. But one thing I also want to do while I've got you guys is to jump into the Asian swing tennis as well, because there's some tennis balls that have been hit and over the last few weeks. And Candy, I want to bring it to you first, because I believe it was 5 minutes after you let me out of the toilet that I was locked in Beijing Tennis Center, and thank goodness you were there, because I was panicking.
I'm a hero.
Like being stuck in this, like fully locked in, like I had no way of getting out. You then walked on to court to commentate on almost the seamless superstars, from how are we ever going to replace the big three to how are we ever going to live without Alcaraz and Sinner, and they've just kind of 4 Grand Slams this year. They've won 2 each. They've won 2 apiece. Alcaraz has got the better of him in the bigger matches this year. Going into that match, and I spoke to you after, I think it was like 17 out of 18 tie breaks, or 17 in a row that Sinner had won, and there he was, double break up, 3-love. And Carlos Alcaraz decided just to bring that forehand out, and before you knew it, 7-3, 7-4. Thank you very much. But what a fitting match to finish a great week in Beijing.
One of the best matches I think I've seen. And I'd never met Carlos Alcaraz and Jannik Sinner live. And so we obviously sit down with them before the tournament begins in media days. We have about 10 minutes or so with the players each. So that's always a nice experience, because you kind of get a feel, and they get to know you and sort of trust you a bit. And then we go on after the match is complete and interview the winner, like I said. And you could just see at the end of that match that Jannik Sinner, you're almost right. I think going into that, he'd won 18 of his last 19 tiebreakers. And he was 3-love up in the final set tiebreaker against Alcaraz in this sort of topsy-turvy roller coaster match, where watching Jannik Sinner move is just a thing of exasperation, amazement and beauty, I think, all rolled into one. The guy can slide on hard courts, and he can't just slide, he can slide what looks like meters. It's ridiculous. I think that's what Novak Djokovic recently said about Jannik Sinner, how well he's moving. And he just looks like a class apart. He's hitting the ball harder, he's missing less. We get the Tennis Insight numbers now on the ATP side, so you can see the shot quality of all the players, forehand, backhand, serve, volleys. And Jannik Sinner is higher than I think everybody on both serve, forehand and backhand. It's insane. But Alcaraz won that match. As I said, one of the best matches I've ever seen live. Just 2 absolute gladiators just going as hard as they possibly could, but in the most respectful fashion. That's what I think is the most impressive. That, they look at each other in the eye when it's all said and done. There's a laugh if something funny happens. They can really appreciate each other. Just a fantastic match. And Alcaraz wins in the end. And it's true that he has this kind of megawatt smile, doesn't he? And he just brings it out. Sometimes when he loses, but mostly when he wins. And he's just the most genuinely nice chap, as is his dad, who I met briefly as well. The whole team just see really good quality, as do Jannik Sinner's. And of course, there's a bit of a sort of grey area, isn't there, with Jannik Sinner? I don't know if you want to speak about that a bit, but it must be so hard for him to play at the moment with all that hanging on, and he's still playing like one of the best that's ever played this game. It's crazy.
It seems to me that Sinner, he has a Djokovic about him, right? You almost feel like, Djokovic has won all those titles where he's gone into this lockdown mode in the moments, the big moments, and it's like, I'm just not going to miss. And we even saw it at the Six Kings final the other day. It was like, I was watching with my son, and it was 3-3 in the second set, and then 12 points later, Sinner's made no mistakes and he's shook hands at 6-3. And, you know, these best players, and I'll throw this out there, and I don't know what you think on this, Eleanor, but what I see Sinner's way bringing more sustainable success than Alcaraz's way. As amazing as they all are, I think the way that they're going, when all's said and done in a few years' time, that Sinner might be the one that has a few more than Alcaraz.
I don't know, actually. That's an interesting one. I mean, to me, you mentioned that, you know, the big three or the big four or the big, whatever we want to call them. And to me, I see the legacy in what we have now. I look at Alcaraz and Sinner and I see elements of Federer, elements of Nadal. You can see who they grew up watching. And I think that's a really interesting kind of thread that runs all the way through. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, as Candy said, Sinner's showing, whatever your thoughts on his situation, he's showing phenomenal mental strength to just be able to play that level of tennis as he is, with all that going on, because that's a terrible, you know, that's a terrible thing to carry around and have to deal with, and so, you know, I think that shows just how confident he is now and how strong. Yeah, I think they're just very different styles of players, and I think they'll probably do well on different surfaces. I think Alcaraz is probably going to be the best player of his generation on grass, I would say, just because of his movement and his speed, as long as he can keep that speed. You know, I think he's also, for me, Alcaraz is just a joy to watch in the same way that, you know, watching a sort of young Roger Federer was. You know, you watch him and you can hear the gasps and and I haven't seen that. Oh, and why has he even got to that? And everything. There's this energy about him. Really,
and he likes to entertain as well. He's not just about winning. He loves to entertain.
And there's an infectious energy about him, which I think, in terms of attracting people to the sport and being a kind of real talisman for the sport, I think that's going to be really, really important. Sinner, I think, is brilliant to watch for the tennis purist, but I think Alcaraz has got a kind of star quality.
Calv, I want to bring it to you in a second, but I want to share a couple of insights. Sinner was sat there, and these are the bits I like, that you get these little kind of personal insights. And then I can announce, if no people don't know, then Kalinskaya came up. I know everyone's talking, are they together, are they not? And she just sat with him while he had his dinner. His team wasn't around him, you know, and there's those little moments, you know, that you see at different times. And I thought about starting a new podcast actually during the Asian Swing, which was the Elevator Diaries, because it was like every day I got on the elevator and there was some new kind of superstar that was in the elevator with me. And I'll share a couple with you now, which the first one, I just arrived in Beijing and someone was texting me and someone said, oh, what's this about? What's Osaka doing with Mouratoglou? And, you know, obviously that's a narrative that's quite common in our sport. And we know Mouratoglou's skills are very much sales related, you know, and how he sells his story, how he sells and brings belief to players. So there's 8 elevators in Beijing. And it's 6:30 in the morning. Believe it or not, it might not look like it. I was going to the gym. I got up, I got in one of the 8 elevators, and there was Naomi Osaka. And, you know, we had a nice little polite little conversation, not a whole lot. Went to the gym, went to breakfast, got back in the elevator, again, one of 8. And somebody kept the door open for me, and it was Patrick Mouratoglou. And I went to press my button, number 8. I was on floor 8, and he said, I've already pressed it for you. And he was on the same floor as me. And we had a delightful conversation, Calv, you'll be pleased to know, about Naomi Osaka. You know, and obviously Naomi, I'm a big fan of Osaka. I think she brings a lot to the women's game. She was on that run in Beijing, and it looked like, you know, already there was a bit of an instant impact maybe. But unfortunately, she's now out for the season, I believe. But that's my elevator stories. There's plenty more. Maybe it's not a podcast, but
I think you need to sell this idea to James Corden, Dan.
There's more, but I'll save it for another time because I want to bring back to Calv. When we talk about rivalries, and again, football right now, Arsenal, Man City's getting like a bit more of a rivalry because there's a bit of hatred. You can feel it. The players are going at each other. There's a niggle. You know, you kind of have the good guy, the bad guy. You know, those are things that we buy into. Is there a danger that the good guy Yannick Sinner and the good guy Carlos Alcaraz, and they both seem delightful young men, are they both too nice? And is it going to take more to get that rivalry going? Because it's quite hard to know which side you fall on, right? In terms of that, what do you think about that, Calv?
I mean, I think it's kind of been surrogated out though, because their fans, as I have seen in the last few weeks, tennis Twitter fans are psychopaths, so they will take that. They will take care of that for them. I think. I mean, ideally, yeah, you'd want sort of different personalities. But
Djokovic was the bad guy, Nadal the good guy. You know, you tend to have it a bit.
You had Roger and Rafa, who were very similar in complementary styles of tennis, but kind of were both the good guys. And then, as you said, when Novak came along, slightly kind of broke through slightly later at that very high level.
I would say on Roger Rafa though, you had the kind of man-made champion, the muscles, the force, and he happened to use his left hand, as well. And then you had the grace, the elegance. They were both nice guys, but they were very opposite.
Yes, even the kind of Federer was, the fact they never sweat, he never appeared to sweat, and he seemed to cover the entire court without ever seeming to actually move. It was all just gliding around. And I mean, they were very extreme, weren't they? Because Roger was so sort of coiffed and just wafting around the court, hitting his beautiful shots, and Nadal was so kind of muscular and sweaty and much more kind of visceral. But yeah, and you don't have that, but also the rivalry is relatively young.
I think that's the relevant thing. What Ellen has pointed out there. I think the rivalry essentially will be dependent on how many big matches they play, and
they haven't played a slam final yet.
Yeah, and I think that's what will determine it. I mean, I don't like the Federer Nadal rivalry. I'm not sure. Was it actually ever called a rivalry before those Wimbledon finals? And they'd played a lot before that.
Yeah.
I don't know if people were referring to it as
an unbelievable match in the Rome final, which I still think is probably the best men's match I've ever seen live. And so they were playing some phenomenal matches at tour level in big finals. And those in those days, remember, you had actually best of 5 finals on the ATP tour.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I mean it's it's building. I think it's building, and we also someone else can emerge.
Yeah, I think that's another thing. I think you're gonna need a couple more. Otherwise, you kind of get a situation where the first weeks of slams, the first 10 days of slams, kind of become irrelevant. You don't want situations where, I mean, problem with like in the late 70s, early 80s at Wimbledon, you already knew who the 2 finalists were going to be. So it wasn't, as great as those finals were, the tournament, nobody really talks about the tournaments as a whole. Whereas I think that we are going to need a couple more who, they might not be the same, they might not be quite that level, but they have to have the capability of beating them. And I think the level below that at the minute, as kind of, those two have shifted away, I think. Like, I don't think Medvedev's in the same league as either of those two now, either in terms of his own results against other players, or against when he's playing them. He's now getting the stage where he's getting stuffed quite a bit against the two of them. Same with Tsitsipas, Zverev, those guys. I think it's who is the third best. Djokovic maybe, but
Djokovic, yeah.
Yeah, who's the fourth best player in the world?
Zverev's
miles away from those two though.
Yeah,
at the minute. I think you're right. I think it is Zverev. I mean, Djokovic now. You're now getting to the stage where Djokovic, you don't expect him to beat them.
No, you don't. But and on the women's side, the obvious one, Candy, is Sabalenka for us to talk about. However, the one I want to start with, she's a delight to watch. She's a delight to watch, is Mukova. And, she has the game style to go up against a Sabalenka as well. We don't see many that do anymore, but she has. And there was this classic point in Beijing, I think it was 6-5, first set tiebreak. Sabalenka hit a serve. She took this early backhand line, followed it to the net. Sabalenka ripped a ball. She then played this little half volley pickup. Sabalenka ran up to the ball and then she just knocked the ball past her. And it was just like, yes, this is what we want to see. And, we talk about kind of contrasting styles. Now, obviously the jury's out a little bit with her. When she's healthy, she's winning a lot of matches. Semi-finalist in New York, finalist in Beijing, then didn't play Wuhan, then went on and played, I believe, in Ningbo and was in the semi-finals and retired injured against Mira Andreeva. So is she able to stay healthy to do it? But she can play some serious tennis, right?
Well, I think she is actually my favourite player to watch. I don't know how the others feel, but certainly on the WTA side, whenever Karolina Muchova is playing, I'm interested. I actually got to commentate on the whole tournament for Ningbo along with Claire Curran. And so we enjoyed the final. I don't know if anyone got to see it, but it was probably the most dramatic women's final, or one of the top 5 I've ever seen. Mira Andreeva versus Daria Kasatkina. Perhaps we can speak about that later, but you're right. Muchova had to retire after losing the first set to Andreeva. On the Saturday, she'd played a really long match the previous night and finished really late against Anna Kalinskaya, a match which began on Friday, ended on Saturday. And you're right, it's the only thing is her body, because this time it was back. She'd come back to tennis in June or July at Eastbourne after wrist surgery. It's just one thing after another. It's like her body can't quite tolerate it right now, and I'm hoping that will change. 21-7 though. In the last few months since returning at Eastbourne for Karolina Muchova. It's pretty amazing record. And you're right, the only one to really give Aryna Sabalenka some trouble. She seems to be able to deflect pace, doesn't she? And she can throw in serve and volley. She can drop shot at will. She can slice. She can dive. She can hit the ball hard. She's got the whole package. And I really hope that she can win a major, at least one.
But she can't beat Coco Gauff.
Who can?
But isn't that interesting, though, Eleanor, with the game styles? There just is game styles that match, and it's like all of her strengths seem to be able to neutralize Aryna Sabalenka's weaknesses, and then all of her strengths, Coco Gauff seems to be able to neutralize her strengths, on the court as well. And we get told when we're younger, don't look at the draw. It doesn't matter who you play the tennis ball, but, draws are important, right? Because, these matchups do seem to be so important.
It's one of the biggest sort of elements of tennis. And I think it's the one that sometimes casual fans miss is matchups. And there's, you're right, it's so important because everyone has bogey players and everyone has styles of play that they know they can neutralize. And I think Muchova is brilliant to watch. I'm not going to go against the consensus here. I think she's fantastic to watch, and I think she's the tennis player's tennis player in all sorts of ways. She does things that you wish you could do, and she's clever and smart and interesting, and she has variety and all of those things. And I think the matchup against Sabalenka is interesting because of that. It's sort of, when you go back years and you think of like. Fabrice Santoro against Marat Safin, and he used to slice and dice and do all these, different type of player, but it was that similar thing. It was like human kryptonite for that particular player, and that's, I think it's always fascinating. But yeah, I think Muchova, I think she's more than capable of winning a slam. I think she absolutely, and she plays well on all the surfaces as well. And I think she's a fabulous player, and yeah, I think it's incredibly sad that her body so far hasn't been able to stay consistently fit. And it'd be interesting to talk to somebody, it's kind of someone on the sports science side about, whether with tennis you have an injury, you come back and you need to build up for such a long time, and you need your body then to hold together to get that kind of baseline fitness to make sure you don't get injured again. Otherwise, it's just a cycle of comeback injury, comeback injury, comeback injury.
Yeah, well, the problem is you
Yeah.
need the matches to build the volume and to build the tolerance, but you need the body to get the tolerance. Carl, before you jump in, I just want to mention human kryptonite in terms of game styles. I don't know about you guys, but I think most game styles were like human kryptonite against myself. Like that feeling of not knowing what to do. In fact, I'm not sure there was a game style I like playing against, to be honest. But that's maybe more to be said about my skills than anything
People
else.
that miss.
Yeah, I was great against them.
Yeah, I was always had a good record against really bad players. And, yeah, I forget what I was going to say now. I mean, yeah, I think, Makova is a lovely player. I think he's quite similar, actually, in terms of style and how her career's going to Bianca Andreescu, I think, who played, has the similar types of variability, but and still struggles to keep herself fit most of the time. She has actually won a slam, though. The player who we've mentioned her a couple of times, who I think I'm really hoping she makes a move to be one of the very top is Andreeva, because I think there you've got a superstar. You put her in front of a
Which
camera.
one?
And, Mira's way better than Erica, isn't she?
She lost 1 and 3 to her sister.
Yeah, it's the soul sisters thing, isn't it? Like, but no, I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen loads of Erica, to be fair, but I know Mira, whenever, she just is the most natural, lovely girl. Like, when you see her around the tournament, she's so polite. And when you stick her on a camera, and she's just so natural. I think there's one that I could see thinking she's one who could be a superstar.
And she's already top 20.
Yeah. I think it's a strange one, though, Candy, isn't it? It's like, I think it's easy to think that once someone becomes top 20 at such a young age, they'll automatically be top 5. No. But it's not really the way it ever works.
I had an interesting conversation about that same thing, Calvin, with Tom Hill, coach of now Peyton Stearns, formerly Maria Sakkari at the US Open, because I actually said to him, I think Peyton's got the ability to become top 10. And he said, well, I think top 20, but top 10 is another category, because you've got to have everything at that point. And that is really where the line separates between the really fabulous players and then the next best.
Yeah.
Is that you've got to have that X factor, haven't you? That uncontrollable passion, the love, the desire, the work ethic, the ability to stay away from all the bad foods, do all the right things. So it's another level up.
There's a couple of question marks always for me with good young players, because I think it's one of the things that makes them good is their naivety and not really knowing what is out there. And I know it's a different sport, but we all go back to 1998. Michael Owen took the ball down the wing and did that crazy goal for England against Argentina. That was probably his peak. Like, it doesn't always mean that you go on to do greater things. And I know that an emotional tolerance can be built, and it can come with maturity. But I think she has shown signs of some cracking, actually. I think there's been 2, 3, 4 matches I've seen this year, and look, hey, we're all there, right? We all have that in our lives. However, it's not a given that she's going to overcome that. But she reminds me a lot of Coco Gauff. Actually, I think Coco Gauff, I think her sort of journey is very similar to Coco Gauff's, and I think it maybe surprised people. It took Coco a bit of a while to get there to win 1 Grand Slam, yet we're still seeing with Coco that there's a lot of holes there.
I think it's interesting with those younger players, Kiernan. I've always thought this, that occasionally you get these younger players come through in both the men's and the women's game where they're very fast and they make a lot of balls and they can win a lot of matches when they're young, and they and they can win a lot of big matches. And I'll give you some classic examples in a minute. And then they never really move on from that because of their game is quite limited and people figure them out. And the 2 classic ones would be Michael Chang, who won I think he's still the youngest player ever to win a slam, isn't he?
That was because of the underarm serves, Carl. No one had seen it.
Yeah,
they didn't know what was coming.
They did 2 in the whole tournament. But he was just very fast and he made a lot of balls. And he was a very good player. He went on to be world number 2. But I think everybody at the time thought, you've won a slam at 16, you're going to dominate the game. And another one who was similar was Leighton Hewitt, who was completely dominant when he was younger. And yeah, he got to world number one. He won 2 slams. But if you'd have said when he won his first slam, when he beat Sampras at the French Open, that he would only win 1 more slam, you'd have thought we were crazy. But those younger players, when their game is based around just making a lot of balls, if they don't move on from that, they tend to struggle. And I think that you do get the ones who change. Like Nadal, you can maybe say when he first came on the scene, was that type of player. And then he developed huge power as well, and he could do damage as well. Murray was kind of like it, although I always say that Murray had an underrated first serve. I think if Murray's first serve was 10% worse, I think he wouldn't have had the career he had. But I think it's, I think that's why we get often these young players who come through when they're 17 and we think, geez, this player's going to dominate the game. And they just don't, because their game kind of stays the same. And I think that's what worries me about Andreeva, is that she might just be that type of player for the next 10 years, which would be good enough for her to be top 10, I think. I don't know if it wins her multiple slams. Something I just wanted to speak about as well, like when we talked about players who really do themselves justice and come across as great people, like we've mentioned the players there. I think there were 3 guys who didn't cover themselves in glory in China, in Tsitsipas, Zverev, and particularly Francis Tiafoe. And I think that is a real stain on the men's game, I think, what we got from them out there.
It's interesting, isn't it, that there seemed to be a kind of rash of really kind of horrible behavioural issues on court, some of which were, it's not a good look for the sport, and it's not a great example. And I'd be interested to hear everyone's thoughts about what the ATP Tour in particular could do. Is it just end of season, everyone's getting grumpy and tired, and is that an excuse for that behaviour? I'm interested in, does there need to be a kind of stronger code of conduct for the ATP Tour?
I think each one of them a little bit different. I think for starters, what amazed me was that all 3 of them were entirely in the wrong for having a go at the umpire. All 3 decisions the umpires got exactly right. And I don't know whether the listeners know this, but I don't know whether this came in specifically for China, but they definitely let it be known that they would be getting way stricter on the time violation rule, and it would be straight 3 seconds after the point ended, they would start the clock, and if you haven't started the service action by the time of the 25 seconds, then you would be getting a time violation. And the umpire was kind of taken out of it. The umpires said, I spoke to a couple of umpires, and they said, we don't have a choice. If the clock goes, we have to give a time violation. So that was the root of all of these 3 arguments. Now, Francis Tiafoe, and I'm a fan of Francis Tiafoe. I do like him as a person, and I think he could be healthy for the game. But to try and take the mick with what he was trying to do, and then insult everyone's intelligence by saying that he threw the ball up, where he clearly threw the ball up just to gain himself some more time. There's no point having rules if you can break them that easy and get away with it. So the umpire was 100% correct to do that, and he should have just swallowed it up. Zverev...
There was the one before, though. There was the one before that where, I don't know if you saw when he got the point penalty, that was like on the button, like it was literally a split second over. And that, I think, it caused... Now, I didn't see the whole match, so I don't know the context. The context might have been, look, Francis, you're taking the piss here, mate. That's been like 2 or 3 times that you've left it till very, very late. The next time I'm going to have to call it. But there was a one previous that I could understand his frustration.
The thing is, though, Kiernan, that the umpires had told the players, we don't have any room for manoeuvre in this. Like, we've been told by the authorities that we don't have any room for manoeuvre. So even if it's a split second, once that clock hits 25, I have to call time violation. There's no... And I don't have a problem with that. You can't be going, it's 25 unless it's 26. Or it's 26 unless it's 27, because you're a certain type of player. And so, I 25 seconds is a lot of time. It's a lot of time. He was messing around and walking around like he does, and I don't mind it normally, but he does take the mick a bit with how much time he takes. I'm interested to know whether the umpires would have done the same with Peak Nadal. Like, it could have been a bit interesting there. And then you had Zverev, who came with his usual deluded nonsense, which is what you usually get whenever Alex Zverev opens his mouth. And then Tsitsipas was the one that cracked me up because he was the last one. And then he claimed that it came out that all everyone was talking about all week was time violations. And like, everyone's going, I got time violation. You see Zverev, you see Tsitsipas, time violation. Tsitsipas got one, and then he goes, you're not giving time violations to anyone else. You only give them to me. And I was like, have you not watched any tennis this week? But yeah, I mean...
That was a classic interaction, wasn't it? That was the one where it was Fergus, the Irish umpire, where he completely insulted his style of tennis.
I think he was made out by a few people that he called Fergus fat because he said, you definitely have no cardio. But I think what he was actually saying was that the points you play are not long when you play tennis.
He said you were serve volleyer. You didn't need cardio to play serve volley.
But the way that he looked up at him at the same time as going, well, you definitely have no cardio. It was a bit of comedy genius, but I think it was accidental comedy genius, I think. But no, look, on a serious note, they have to behave better than that. I don't know if anything's going to happen about that, but to be honest, I think you should get a ban for that.
I would agree. We actually, Eleanor, it's funny, you're good at this. Literally, this was my next little segue into this area, and I was going to pose the question. Is the Asian swing too long? And I think arguably, I think it is on the women's side. I think maybe not so much on the men's side. I don't have the exact facts, but I think there's almost double the events on the women's side than there is on the men's. And we're starting the second part of that, and I'll get back to the first part, but the second part is all the walkovers we're seeing, which is also a bit unsavoury. We don't want to... I think there was maybe eight or nine lucky losers in Ningbo, and this weekend, again, there's all sorts pulling out in Tokyo. And I think those are certainly signs of a long season and a long period. But we were coming down at breakfast in Wuhan, and you'd come down, and it's all a bit... It could be a bit... It's a bit funny, these tennis tournaments, and it doesn't matter if it's a 1,000 event or it's a futures event. The last thing you want to do at 8 o'clock in the morning when you've just woken up is see 50 or 60 other colleagues or people in the tennis world. And you're kind of walking, and then in Wuhan, it was like, where do I sit? There's no seats. And I did a couple of laps one day just in case anyone wanted to see how bad I was looking and how bad I was feeling about myself in that morning. Eventually they opened this little room, and it was almost like you go in this room and it was quiet, and it was, I can breathe and I can be myself a little bit more. So we found our little table, and you fall into your routines. And for 3 mornings in a row, it was like, because you often... What is the conversation when you're with these players for weeks on end? But the conversation each morning was like, oh my God, these men are losing their marbles. What did you see what happened last night? Like, what are they doing? And I don't know. I tend to think a bit of entitlement's thrown in there for sure. And I think the entitlement look is horrible. It's a really horrible look. I think someone
Zverev, Kiernan. Zverev said, every Grand Slam final I play, you guys cost me it. Like, are you sure? Was it not the double faults that cost you it against Team when you were 2 sets to love up?
Or the lack of ability of putting your forehand away from the middle of the court? Let's work on that, Alexander. Let's not start blaming these umpires.
Yeah.
But Candy, what do you think about the length of time for the Asian swing?
Tricky one, isn't it? Because, of course, the men now are all really European indoor events, apart from Almaty, which is in, I've just lost it, Kazakhstan, of course. So I suppose there's opportunity, aren't there, for the women, where you've got points and prize money for 250s and 500s. But it just seems a lot of players have now put this season to bed, the top players who have already qualified for the WTA finals and those who haven't quite got there, but perhaps they need to reach a semi-final or final to make it worth it in points, and their bodies are tired, so they're putting it to bed. It's so tricky. I mean, as a commentator, I make my living watching tennis and talking about tennis. So for me and everybody who's in the world of tennis, it's great that the season is continuing. And the WTA season finishes earlier than the ATP season. How do we stop this? Actually, there was Jacqueline Christian lost first round qualies in Ningbo and got a direct entry into the second round of the main event, which I've never seen before, when Zhang Qinwen pulled out. So she went in right into the second round.
Is that what happened?
Because the top 4 seeds all had buys. So that was a strange one.
We don't want to see that. We don't want to. For me, that also devalues the tournaments when that happens.
But what do you do about it? I suppose. I mean, you've got to have players filling the 28 players, and you are going to have at this time of the season a lot of injured bodies. And we saw the 2 semi-finalists pull out. So that was awkward after first sets, Paula Badosa and the aforementioned Karolina Mukova. I mean, I like the fact that the season's going on and you've got some other players that can pick up some really decent points and prize money if they've got longevity and they're putting some emphasis into the final part. And we know that the tournament organisers and all those people involved in the tournaments are putting a tremendous effort, so you don't want to devalue them. But I don't know if there's a better solution.
Yeah, because you would like to think that it could be a certain way, but let's take Siniakova, who the world number 1 in doubles, who obviously is also had a very good year in singles. We saw her at WTA finals last year in Cancun, and she was complaining and shouting to any man and his dog that she could. You could see that she'd lost her freshness. You know, you could just see it.
Like we've been talking about the calendar for that whole time, and talking about the length of the season. And I think I would say that one thing that's changed actually recently, and Beijing's a good example, is longer events. You know, these big 1,000 events being 10-day or 2-week events and having multiple ones of those. And I think that has exhausted lots of players, lots of coaches, lots of people who work in the sport. I've heard that from many different people, that those events really burn through people because you're on site for a long time. Yes, you have physical rest between matches, but you've lost quite a lot of weeks off in the season because if you're playing well.
Can I just come in there, Eleanor? Can I just make a point on that? Which I think these 2-week slams, and I know a lot of players are now commenting how ridiculous they are. In that Shanghai, so we went to Shanghai, which was a 2-week event or 10-day event, whatever you want to call it, and they played the first day. There was matches the first day. Then it rained for 3 days non-stop. There was no play other than on centre court. And then it was only on the night of the third day it rained. So you've lost 3 full days. And I was looking at it and I said to Harri and Henry, we're actually not behind in this tournament at all. Everybody in this tournament can still play every day and have a day off, and they'll play the final on the day that the final was scheduled, which highlighted to me that we're just stretching tournaments on for no need whatsoever. If you can lose 3 full days in the middle of it, you don't need a 10-day tournament.
There's different lenses within our sport. From a commercial standpoint, it works. For TV rights, ticket sales, from a commercial aspect, it absolutely works. For the mental health and freshness, and again, it's not that everyone has to have mental health problems. I know some people do, but freshness is real. And mental freshness is a real thing in the world for everybody. You know, you do the same thing over and over and over and over again, you can lose freshness. We all need that. And from my own personal point of view as a coach, I absolutely detest the 2-week events. And they are 2-week events because you get there in advance to practice as well. And for me, I remember being in Rome last year, and I then followed it. The boys, I was with Harri, Heliovarra and Lloyd Glasspool. They lost. We went on to Bordeaux. They lost in maybe the last 16. They went on to play Bordeaux 175 Challenger. They played their first match on Wednesday, their final on Saturday, and it was just luxury. We got into a routine. We turned up. We knew what we were doing. It happened. They won the tournament. We gave up 4 or 5 days. It was fantastic. And I just had this with Gabby Dabrowski and Aaron Routliffe in China. We were there for 3 weeks. They made second round and quarterfinals. I felt like they didn't play a match. That's what it felt like. So there was no. So actually, we made the decision for them to play in Osaka because we felt they needed some matches going into the WTA finals, which is crazy, really. But the nature of the way that they were set up, and we kind of knew this in advance. So one of the big reasons I went out there is we were kind of viewing it as a training block.
I think, as well, it's as you'll know, as I've found, that it's not like you even have any training time then, because you're scraping around for an hour on a practice court, maybe even sharing with someone else. No one wants to play any practice sets once the tournament's started. Maybe, once they've played a first match, no one wants to do that. So you just feel like you're just kicking your heels and killing time, don't you? There's no work to be done in that time. You're just hanging around, waiting for the next round all the time.
I think maybe there could be a compromise of sort of a 9-dayer, because obviously they want, the idea, along with the economics, is to get maybe some of the singles players to play doubles, which they do. Maybe not all the big guys, but say Ben Shelton or that type of player would play doubles too. But I also think some of them are too long and they drag on too long. I would like to see maybe a compromise, having it longer than a week, but not 2 weeks.
I think there's no chance of us getting any compromise. I think it's more likely that they'll go to 2 full weeks than it is that they go back to 7 days.
That's the way it's going.
Yeah. And I think, I know that a couple of people told me last year that they wouldn't write out the slams going to 3 weeks at some time in the next 10 years.
I think all the slams will begin on a Sunday. If I had to guess, all of them soon will begin on a Sunday and end on a Sunday.
Which again is like the perfect slam for the slam works in a perfect formula. You play every other day. That's the way it works. You play every other day through the tournament. You get these ones now starting on Sundays, and it's a mess, because again you get some days where you're looking at it and it's like, well, there's no one playing today. There's no tennis.
I tell you what, Carl, though, we all love a whinge about this, but we all love it, don't we? We'd all still be there. Do you know what I mean? We have a little whinge that it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks. I will see you guys in China next October. We'll still complain.
I'll say something that Candy raised the point there, something that I noticed when I was in China, that basically my entire life, I thought I worked on weekdays, but I link everything to tennis. And so I always think Sunday is when there's a final on. And so now it's like, when I go to Asia, I see the finals and I'm getting up to see the final, right, who do Man United play today at 3:00? And I'm looking through and like, why is there no football today? And it's because it's a Tuesday. And then I was all over the place when I was there. I had no idea what day we were on.
That is the worst thing about Sunday starts for Grand Slams, is I spend then the whole rest of the Grand Slam having no idea what day it is. It's like that bit between Christmas and New Year where you don't know what day it is.
Yeah.
But you have a glass of wine in your hand at that time of year.
Who says I don't do that during a slam?
Well, that's yeah. No judgment. There's a couple of little points I just want to touch on before we finish, guys. Who can tell me who the world number 777 was that won in Hangzhou on the ATP Tour during the Asian Swing? The lowest ranked ATP player, I think, ever to win an ATP event.
Was it Boo?
Who?
Not Boo.
Was it Boo?
Nope. World number 777. Hey, no Googling over there.
And just quickly, while we're thinking about it, have you heard the story of Boo? It's fascinating.
No, tell us.
Well, he was 5 when he was dropped off at a tennis academy and left, essentially, to just get on with things. 5.
Wow.
And that beats Zhang Qinwen, who was 7 years old when she was taken to an academy for a trial. What she didn't know is if she passed...
Mandy.
What's that?
Don't give people ideas. Oh, my goodness.
Well, Zhang Qinwen passed the test at 7, and little did she know that her parents were leaving her there.
Wow.
Who was it then, Kiernan?
So I'm going to give you one more clue. This person has also won a Grand Slam.
In singles?
Doubles, it's got to be.
Singles.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Del Potro. No.
Well, Del Potro, he didn't play in
Philip.
Asia on this occasion. There you go,
Philip,
Eleanor.
gosh, yeah.
Yes. So the world, so 777 was his ranking before that event. The other couple of things, Dominic Thiem retiring Candy this week, I believe, last event. I know it's not the Asian swing, but in Vienna. And, I mean, what a player he was, but also, wasn't it incredible how the margin of just, he had the wrist injury, came back, he seemed to give it his all, but maybe just lost a little bit on the quality of his ball. So now he couldn't compete. You know, it just goes to show, like, everything has to be in absolute working order to be at the very top of the game.
I think it was more than a little bit, though. He had to completely change his grip, didn't he?
I don't know that.
Yeah, on the forehand. His forehand, if you look at it now, he's moved a good quarter inch over on his grip, and I think then he just lost all the ability to get any kind of heaviness on the ball.
Yeah, and after he won a US Open, it wasn't just the wrist injury, was it? It was sort of a motivation factor that took him out of the game. And he just never really recovered. So whether it was the wrist doesn't have enough strength, the forehand and the backhand went awry. One of the things actually during Beijing that we asked all the players, all the top 8 seeded players, was sort of thoughts on Dominic Thiem, which will be coming out soon. But I will tell you, I can't reveal much, but everyone just loves that guy. Just absolutely loves the guy. And you usually get one person or two people that maybe say, "Oh, I'd rather not say anything because don't really think much of them," or you know, just an average word or two. But the guys were just couldn't say enough good things about Dominic Thiem.
I have to share a quick story because one of my favourite ever stories, and we get these moments, right? We're all very privileged to be at these events, and you know, we bump into different people at different times. You know, Eleanor, all of those Chinese fans had the privilege of bumping into me and getting my autograph in Wuhan.
Lucky them.
But we won't tell that story. We'll just make the pictures look better than it probably was at the time. But 2012. I was working with Liam Brodie and Josh Ward-Hibbert at Australian Open, and they were playing the juniors. They were in the junior doubles final, and a certain Roger Federer asked for a lefty to warm him up before his semi-final with Rafael Nadal, and Paul Annacone was working with Federer at the time. So me and Liam went on to Rod Laver to warm Federer up, and as you would have heard the stories of Federer, unbelievably chilled, relaxed, lovely, asking me about the junior days. I knew him as a junior, asking me about Simon Dixon, David Sherwood. And then he said, "How are the juniors these days?" And this just shows how quick time flies. I said, "Lots of good." He goes, I don't know any. He goes, "I know one of them, and I've practiced with him a couple of times, and he's going to be good. He's really good. A guy called Dominic Thiem." And that was the one name that Roger Federer brought up back in 2012.
What does he know?
Exactly. And it wasn't a bad call by him. But isn't it sad that all of a sudden his career's over? It happens pretty quick, I guess. You know, because in 2012, Federer's talking about the junior Dominic Thiem. And here we are in 2024, and he is retired. And he's not the high profile star that is retiring, and we have the hottest ticket in town here at Soto Tennis Academy because somebody had the foresight to see that potentially a first round Davis Cup tie ticket might be a good ticket to get a few months ago, just in case a certain Rafael Nadal is retiring. And we managed to get 60 or 70 tickets, which I will let everyone know we are not selling on the market, even though it is tempting because we can get $2,500 per ticket right now. So face value, all of the academy players will be going to see a certain Rafael Nadal in Malaga in a couple of weeks. And Eleanor, you know, when these greats that were just so associated with the sport, they retire, it hits hard, right? And I know we've seen it coming for a while, but finally it's the end for Rafael Nadal.
Yeah, and I mean, it's been quite the year, hasn't it, for retirements? You know, when the guys at the International Tennis Hall of Fame, they're going to have a very busy next few years. There's going to be a queue for me, isn't there? You think about all the people who've retired this year alone, and Dominic Thiem in that way, not great timing to pick this year to retire because it kind of, you know, no. It's like it's incredible, isn't it? And yeah, I think I think it has been coming. I think we kind of knew at Roland Garros that it was really unlikely we were going to get to see him again. And then there were a few mixed messages coming out from the Nadal camp of, is he hitting? Is he not hitting? Is he going to play? Is he not going to play? And then, is he trying to get back, or is it the end? And I think probably that's because he didn't know, because I think he was always hoping right till the end, a bit like Andy Murray, that the body would somehow hold up, while kind of knowing that it wasn't going to. And with the Davis Cup being in Malaga, there's an opportunity which is quite rare to be able to say goodbye on your own terms. And I think you can see why he's grasped that opportunity.
Any words for Rafa, Candy, Calv?
Not loads, no. I mean, I said on another podcast last week, he's kind of like when we talk. I hate the GOAT debate.
Me too.
We've got a herd of goats. And aren't we lucky?
I think it's pointless. But when it's discussed, it tends to be between Djokovic and Federer. And I wouldn't say any of them are. I wouldn't say definitively any of them are. I think it's best just to enjoy them. I don't like the idea that whoever wins the most slams is the greatest of all time. I kind of think once you've gone past a certain amount, it's kind of meaningless it's not meaningless, but it doesn't hold as much relevance. Like, I always use the example of, I remember when Pete Sampras won his 11th, I think, he took the record off Roy Emerson. And nobody thought, all due respect, nobody thought Roy Emerson was the greatest tennis player of all time before then. He just had the most number of slams. And, and I think Djokovic has been a little bit more fortunate with injuries than Nadal and Federer. And I think you could say that's maybe why he has the most. He's just played more of them later in his career.
I'm just saying goodbye to your Twitter feed right now, because I can see that when you go on Twitter later.
They've all got me blocked already anyway, Eleanor. So,
Calvin's the most blocked Twitter user of all time. Don't worry about that, Eleanor.
But I think we've mentioned about 4 people who've blocked me on this podcast alone. What was I going to say? No, I think, but I didn't realise if you look at his record in the slams, I forget the exact numbers, but I think his record in slams I think Federer's record in slams against Djokovic and Nadal is 10 and 21. I think Djokovic's record is something like 18 wins, 17 losses. And Nadal's is something like 22 wins and 10 losses. It's by far the best of any of the 3. So, and I've said this many times, I think at his best, he might be the best. And then I think he was. It's been a while since we've seen him at his best. I think that's the thing. Even his last few slams, it's kind of the patched up, playing on noose, playing on savvy, and we've kind of forgot how good he was when he was fully fit, and he was phenomenal, an absolute phenomenal tennis player.
One thing I'd like to jump in and say there about Rafa is, and I see this, granted it's a Spanish tennis academy that I'm in, but it's not really Spanish players. And no doubt, Serena Williams, Roger Federer, going back a long time, Steffi Graf, Martina Navratilova, the impact that they have on people is massive. And we all are in love with Roger Federer, right, for what he stood for. There's a big part of the world for what Serena and Venus have stood for. But in terms of impact and inspirational, aspirational, I think Rafael Nadal takes some beating. I think there's more kids out there that are running around saying, I'm Rafael Nadal, probably, than they are saying, I'm Roger Federer. I think there's something just in his fighting spirit, in the way that he is, in just how that whole thing comes across. I think adults probably are more swayed a little bit more to Roger Federer elegance, whereas I think kids are more swayed towards the absolute bulldog, or the bull rather than the bulldog as a Spaniard of Rafael Nadal. People have been asking questions, so this is going to be a little fun thing to finish, and please put your hand up and jump in. So this was one of the things I wanted to ask anyway, but I'm going to ask the question from Stu, so you can jump in here, Candy. Is Wim an ideal pick for Iga, or simply the obvious choice?
I think she should have gone with Craig Tyser. Vin Facet's had a lot of players that have lasted about a year and a half, obviously, has won major titles. I think she would have done better with Ash Barty's former coach.
Next one, while I've got you, Candy, and this might include you as well, Eleanor. I know you were only in Wuhan, but you might know this from
Only in
WTA
Wuhan.
events.
Eleanor Preston,
Well,
she's a legend around the world.
I know, but in the Asian swing. Rank the WTA events by food quality. Which is the best? Which brings the best food? Maybe we go Asia. I would say Wuhan was better than Beijing, actually.
Oh, score for Wuhan.
I thought Wuhan was fantastic.
That will please them.
And
I'll pass that on. That will make them very happy that you said that.
The only thing I would say is we loved the beef tacos on day one and they didn't come back again. We were like, where's the beef tacos? And they didn't come back. But the food was excellent.
I can't really comment because I was only in Beijing, but I'd give Beijing food an 8.5 out of 10.
What about other events? Let's get out of Asia.
The food in Bologna for Davis Cup was my absolute favourite.
Anywhere in Italy?
Yes.
Anywhere in Italy. I would also give a little nod to the Australian Open because you get really good coffee. Really good coffee and, good sandwiches.
Australian Open best by far out of the Grand Slams.
By far. A country mile.
Australian Open, then US Open, Wimbledon and French Open need to up their game. That's for sure.
Nice.
It's good to finish on a lighter note of what was some heavier parts. You're both stars, and Calvin, he's gone already, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dan.
And please jump to take care of the kids, do what you need to do, and I hope to see you guys soon. Thank you so much for your time.
Bye all.
Thanks, guys. Well, at the start, I promised you fireworks, and yeah, I don't think it disappointed, right? I think there's some very emotionally charged topics that we talked about, and I make no apologies here at the podcast that, you know, we're bringing these topics to the forefront. I think if nothing else, it's great for people to discuss it, for it to be out there, right? We don't want any of these things to be in hiding. And, you know, Calvin obviously brought a lot of very valid points forward. You know, in the world of tennis, depending on your position, it's not so easy probably to discuss these things. But, you know, the facts are there that there is challenges in that region, in that part of the world. And I think we should all go into that absolutely with our eyes open, you know. From a personal point of view, I will be there running some YouTube lives, you know, getting some little podcasts. So look out for those. Subscribe to the Control the Controllables YouTube, because we're going to be bringing quite a bit of content to you over the next few months. And that will start with some of the lives that I'm going to bring from Saudi. And, you know, hopefully we'll get some interesting people to talk about. I'm sure there's going to be some stories that are becoming, you know, out there. I think the eyes are going to be on the WTA finals, one after what happened in Cancun last year, which I don't think was good enough in various levels for what is the prestigious event of the WTA finals. And two, it's Saudi Arabia, you know, and with the women's rights and the challenges that have happened in that region, it's a WTA finals. It's the best women tennis players in the world, you know, and it's very much led in that way. You know, would there still be this discussion in industries that are led by males? I don't know. I think that's one topic that maybe we didn't fully touch on, you know, and certainly from my point of view, I talk about this a lot. You have to see it to be it. So I'm hoping there's going to be some real positive impact on the young females in Saudi Arabia in particular that are gonna see these incredible women, these incredible athletes, you know, what they have achieved. Now, whether that can impact a whole nation and how that nation operates, of course, that's another thing entirely. And hopefully that will have some degree of impact. In terms of the rest that we discussed, you know, there's many topics we could delve into, but I think we all agreed, you know, there was lots of positives, and I think again one of my reflections would be, you know, if we take a place like Wuhan, You know, we take a place like China that maybe had a reputation for, and I'm sure there's still things that are going on, but has had certain reputations from the outside. They've certainly developed their country in lots of ways, you know, and there's lots of delightful people that seem very, very happy and are certainly very welcoming to us coming into their country. Now, would that have been the same 40, 50 years ago? I don't know. But I'd like to think that the sport of tennis is playing a positive role within that as well, because I think there's no denying we all enjoyed the experience. You know, fair play, hats off to everyone that's organised those tournaments, you know, from the hotels to the food to the transport to the fans, to the friendliness of the fans, to the court. Maybe not the balls. I know some people were complaining about the balls. They weren't the easiest, but hey, that's not a China thing. That's just a tennis thing, right? We're always complaining about the balls. It seems to be a topic of conversation every week. But yeah, I tip my hat to all of those events and how they've run, and providing opportunity for these players to get that well-needed finance points to continue their journeys. I do personally believe it's too long. I think we are packing a few too many tournaments in, and as we talked about in the episode, if you're getting to the point where 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, Jacqueline Christian losing first round qualifying, but then getting in as a lucky loser and going straight into the second round of the main draw. I don't think that's our sport. I think we lose some value in our tournaments when that's happening. So what the answer is, I don't know, but I think the schedule probably, as ever, needs to be looked at to make sure that these things aren't happening and people are valuing. You enter a tournament, you play the tournament, you give your best, right? It's what I teach my kids. You know, I remember, you know, you sign up for the football team, you play the season. You know, if you want to quit at the end of the season, that's fine. But once you've signed up, you know, these are the messages we're giving to our youngsters, and that seems to go a little bit amiss at the top end of the game. And then obviously the mental health and physical health of the players needs to be taken care of as well. But that's an old adage. That's a story we've talked about for a long, long time. But I think overarchingly a positive Asian swing. Nice to see China getting back on their feet. Let's see what happens in Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, the final words go to Rafael Nadal, you know, the King of Spain. He could be, you know, for all that we think of him in Spain. You know, he is godlike in how we look at him. He is a legend, not only of the game, he's a legend, you know, and he's someone that for us to for all had the privilege. I think I said it in the podcast, the inspiration. He's just that guy. He has inspired so many. I saw my son's social media post when he announced that he was retiring, and he's genuinely heartbroken. You know, he's over the last few years, he's watched Rafael Nadal. He's the reason that he wants to get the racket out and go and play tennis, and he's had that impact on millions and millions of people worldwide. And I want us to pay tribute to him, and I'm going to be lucky to be in that crowd in Malaga to do so, and I'm sure many of you will be as well, or sitting at home watching that as well. And that's it from me, I think. Lots and lots of tennis still to be played in 2024, and I hope you're well wherever you are in the world. Please do get in touch. We love engaging with you. Share this podcast far and wide, and until next time, I'm Dan Kiernan, and we are Control Controllables.